Hello, hello. I believe we are live now. Yes, we are. All right, cool. All right, welcome. Welcome, everybody, to this fantastic live podcast / YouTube video where we have some fantastic guests, and we're going to be answering some really important questions. Here. So the title of this is going to be, what does a project need to do to stay secure? And Trust is rolling up right now, or is rolling up right now. Give him a minute to get situated. But yeah, we're going to be answering this question. What does a project need to do to stay secure? If a lot of you out there have been watching the DSS, the DeFi Security Summit panels, you know that this was a huge topic of discussion, right? And there's many different opinions on the correct answer to this. And so today we have some of the brilliant minds here. Trust, I'm going to add you. Trust, you good to go? Want to give me a thought? Can you hear me? All right, cool. So we have some brilliant minds here to answer this question on, what do we need to do to stay secure? What do projects need to do? What is the thing that, hey, if you do these, if you go through this checklist, there's at least a high level of confidence that you're secure, because as we all know, there's no such thing as perfect code. So I will go ahead and let the panel introduce themselves. Tincho, you want to go ahead and start?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here and organizing this panel. So I'm Tincho. I'm a security researcher at a small hacker collective called the Red Guild. We do application security research and education. I created the pretty popular Capture the Flag challenge, similar to a Capture the Flag challenge called the Vulnerable DeFi. And I used to be a lead auditor at a company called Open Zeppelin.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Tincho. Josselin, I know we've had a couple interviews in the past as well. Why don't you introduce yourself too?
Sure. I'm Josselin. I'm the engineering director of the blockchain team at 12bit. I am the author of Slither. I've been working in the InfoSec space for about a decade now, and I've been focusing on blockchain security for the past 6 years, more or less.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Josselin. Or another person that I've interviewed in the past as well. Oh, or you might be muted. If you're talking, you're still muted. We'll get there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I had to do with the mic. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'm Trust from Trust Security. I've been active in this space about a year now, doing mainly bug bounties and audit contests, and as of 2023, I'm mostly doing private audits for a bunch of clients, and trying to do much more of like direct contact between auditors and projects through the Trust Security brand. That's mostly it.
Awesome. Cool. And the only one I haven't actually interviewed in the past, Alejandro, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Alejandro Munoz McDonald. I am a smart contract triager at Immunefi. So I started in this space around 2017. And after then, I was a software developer turned bug hunter, and then turned triager at Immunefi. So some of the things I do is create content for security researchers in the space, started with some YouTube videos and Medium articles. And we just released our top 10 security vulnerabilities on the Immunefi website. So you can go ahead and check that out.
Nice, cool. Very badass. So this is going to be a little bit different than kind of traditional panels out there, where a lot of them, it's like, all right, question, answer. I want to kind of workshop this. These are 4 of the smartest minds in Web3 security, in my opinion, and would love to really dial this in. If I'm a new protocol in this space, right now I kind of get bombarded with advertisements that just say, hey, go get a security audit. And I think, okay, I'll just get an audit and then I'm done, right? And then it's good, right? I check that box. Like if you go to sites like rugdoc.io or other sites that are kind of more, I don't want to say like normie friendly, but more like normie friendly, they literally have like a checkbox that just says like, is it audited or not? And I feel like the the community sentiment past that, there's not much going on past that. It's like, hey, was it audited? Cool. You know, it doesn't matter who audited it. The audit is the final step, etc. But yeah, so let's start there, right? Like, let's start from the beginning of a project's life cycle. Like, what do we think a project needs to do just right from the get-go? You know, hey, I have this idea. I'm going to create a brand new DeFi AMM. Where do I start with a security mindset? And then anyone can take this anywhere they want. I will be taking notes throughout this. An AI, I think, won't do a good enough job to take notes here.
Yeah, maybe I can start on this one. So I think like really the first step that any project and any company should do is that they need to identify someone in the company that is going to own security. They need to have someone who is going to be responsible to make strategic decisions regarding security. If you have a small company, idea like this person might be like the co-founder, you know, someone at this kind of level, because you need to have someone who has who understands the business constraint, but also the company goal, and to be able to make the decision regarding security. You don't want to put this responsibility into the engineer because they are going to have conflicting goals based on, you know, what are the go-to-market and what's the timeline. For a larger company, you can hire someone to be in that position. But if you have, you know, like a team of like 5 people, you probably don't have the resource to have someone dedicated for that. But you need someone who is going to run security, because then all the decision regarding, you know, how many audits, regarding like what type of audits, regarding the security practices, regarding the security development practices, you need someone who is responsible for that within your company.
So you mentioned something important there. You said, hey, you don't want to put this on an engineer since there's going to have conflicting incentives. But then you were talking a little bit about the smaller teams. So if I'm a team of 2, you know, because we've seen a lot of DeFi protocols with just like really, really small teams. Is it just like, all right, one of you 2 is responsible for security?
Yeah, and again, ideally, it should be like one of the co-founder. Like it should be someone who can say, who has the responsibility and the understanding of the business to say, okay, we are not going to go to market until, you know, this is fixed or until this is addressed, or we are okay to go to market with, you know, this risk because we are okay with that. So you need someone who can own this type of decision.
I would agree with that, with what Josselin was saying. I do also get the feeling that many small teams don't have the skills even or the capacity to think in those terms. But I do believe that there should be somebody security minded, at least one person that is at least security minded, that can think of how to secure the system, how to test the system in the proper way. I don't know, be mindful of the libraries that you're using, of the components that you're using, of the security practices that you're putting into the development process. You shouldn't be reinventing the wheel, right? So there's lots of building blocks that you can already use in your team when you're building something from start, that you can build upon that, and you don't need to do everything from scratch.
So what do you mean by you're saying, hey, most teams don't have the skills to be security mindset? Do you think there needs to be almost like even more fundamental, a more just like a shift in the mentality of the entire ecosystem before we even, because you know, if Josselin's like, all right, step 1, assign somebody to be the security head, and we're like, all right, Bob, you're the security head, and Bob's like, I don't know anything about security. Are we missing like a fundamental mind share of security mindset? Is there curious on your on thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think we do see, like, you know, we do see a difference in 2 companies building more or less the same thing. If one of the co-founder has a security mindset, we are going to see it in terms of practices, in terms of, you know, like design, testing, and all that stuff. So I think it's definitely something that is missing for a lot of companies, and, you know, we should put a bit more emphasis into this. Like security is not just about audit or bug contest or, you know, like all the different things. It's more than that, and it should be at the core of the project that you are building, given kind of like the risk that you're going to have in the blockchain space.
Okay, so what other stuff then? I guess this is literally the purpose of this call here, right? This panel. So what other stuff does a protocol need to do to think about to be like, okay, I have this checked off? Something that I've kind of been teaching recently is Nascent has a really nice, simple security checklist. Obviously, we've been shilling the Trail of Bits secure contracts website as well. Are these kind of sufficient tools for engineers to walk through to say, okay, this is what I need to go before I even go talk to a security expert?
I think this is. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think this is a good start. You have to start somewhere, and this kind of simple checklist or guidelines or best practices that are shared around, I think are a good start. I don't think a project can be ready even to get a first security review by a reputable company if they didn't even like did the basics around testing and documentation and some basics on fast testing or running some tools. Like there is some basic stuff that people should have covered even before contacting a security firm, right?
Perfect.
I think
So
like every different firm has different, like they need to understand like how mature is their security awareness, and at that point they can decide like what do they want to delegate outside and what do they need to do internally. So basically a team of two, which aren't like mostly co-founders and aren't as security aware, they need to have a much more deep relationship with an audit firm like Trail of Bits, and they can instruct them at every single point in time. What are the things they should be getting right, and it progressing in a stage like from getting to 0 to 100% coverage to doing a bunch of tests, like for rare scenarios, and then getting an audit, and what are all the things you need to be looking out after an audit, and how to manage a bug bounty, and and that could differ from other teams, like for example Polygon, which has an entire like a division which is doing security internally, and they don't necessarily need that outside expertise. So I think that it depends on like each team needs to have this solid understanding of where they are.
Yeah, it also depends on like kind of like your own security maturity and what you are building. If you are building a project that requires 2 months of development, you have like 2 smart contracts and you have a senior developer on it, most likely you're going to have some security maturity. You probably just need like a review at the end of the project. Now, if what you are building is like a multi-year development project with many components, like you have many interaction, it's like a really complex system, then you probably would benefit from kind of external people helping you building it, mid-cycle or having like this kind of iteration approach. So there is also like a question of the experience of like your team and what you are building and the complexity of what you are building.
So almost feels like there's a little bit of, I don't want to say haziness, but definitely some subjectiveness here, where it's, if you're feeling less secure, maybe reach out to a security firm so they can do a security review. If you're feeling good, but I feel like that's probably the hard thing here, right? Like how does a product know how they're feeling, right? And the other thing with that is, let's say they do reach out to a security firm, and the security firm is not that good, and they go, "Yep, you're good," and they go, "All right, cool," and then they ship, and then they get exploited. To me, it feels like this mindset of like, hey, like if you feel like you should have more, for a lot of protocols, a lot of them are going to be like, well, no, we're good, for budget reasons, for lack of like, it's hard to be like, all right, go out there, and if you feel secure, go to a security professional, even though you don't have the experience to know if you're feeling good.
I think it comes down to the first question, right? And having someone in your company that is going to own security, because this type, like no one will have enough insight from the external point of view to really understand your business case, to really understand the constraints you have, like the funding you have, like how much. Like security is also like a budget restriction, right? Like you don't have unlimited budget for security. So to understand where you are at and to make this type of decision, that's why like the first step is really to have someone owning security.
All right, cool. So then we'll say step 1, have somebody own security. Are we all on the same page with that? That can be step 1. Assign somebody to own security. Okay, great. So this person, they will own security. they will go try to become somewhat familiar. Yes, as Tincho mentioned and or mentioned, they should cover some basic steps. Obviously, test coverage should be up. They should have some simple fuzzing. They should understand their invariants, which even that might be more advanced than a lot of the protocols that ship in this space. But let's assume for a second that people understand that. People understand test coverage. People understand fuzzing. Let's go to the next step then, because I feel like if they go to the next step here, that next step, if they go to a security professional, the security professional will be easily able to say, hey, you're not ready. You need to go back and get these fundamentals, right? So that we can catch it on this next step. So what's the next step here? Is the next step to go to a security professional?
Yeah, I think it's depends on like how advanced you are, but generally the next step, once you have all the basics right, is like really unmapping your attack surface and what is the threat actor and what can they possibly be doing with your protocol. And once you unmap everything, like basically map down all these like possibilities around like what is the user supposed to be doing, what's the protocol supposed to be able to change and whatever. Then you can start having additional, like more confidence in the way that your code is structured and how it's working properly. And once you have like a specification of what is the expected behavior, all these different functions and how they interact with each other, then you might be able to check it better by yourself as a team, as a security expert on the team. And that's also sets you up pretty well for moving outside and getting some like experts from other like sources, and they will be able to validate if all of your assumptions are correct or have you been missing something. But that is like the next step of really uncovering what could go wrong in your protocol.
So if I'm understanding this right, so we basically have step one, somebody own security. Step two, we didn't really say this as an explicit step, but let's say this is step two is like get your basics, test coverage, fuzzing, documentation. Now you're kind of saying step three is what? How would I quantify this into a one-liner? Is this like really understand your protocol?
Basically understand what your assumptions are and what your threat model is. You need to have like a very like solid understanding of what your protocol is actually susceptible to and how are you mitigating any of these potential attacks.
How would somebody go about going through that exercise? Is just I'm going to think about my protocol. What does that look like in practice? Is there a model that they follow to do this?
Well, I would say that many aren't mature enough to think about that in a sophisticated, like in a sufficiently like good way that they'll be able to have a maximum confidence around that. And that's why you want to initiate some dialogue with external experts who will help you with this process. This could be like some sort of consultation, or this could be a package including an audit and also like a threat actor assumptions and all the sorts of defense that's required around that.
So we're thinking step three here is either you go through your threat assumptions, or you and probably even if you do think you have a good handle, you still reach out to a security professional. It sounds like this step three is understand your assumptions and threat model / reach out to security professional. Is that accurate?
I think pretty much, but I'm sure others can add around that issue.
Yeah, curious what everyone else thinks too.
Go ahead, Josselin, go ahead. It's your turn.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I will go. I would agree with what Russ was saying. The counter argument that you, Patrick, shared as well is, I think it to some extent might be true, that not everybody can think in those terms. But it's a good exercise to at least try to think adversarially towards your project. Try to think in ways that things can go wrong. One source of inspiration can be like the weekly hacks that we have in Web3. Try to learn from that and see where any of that might apply to your project, and try to start building from there, right? And also, I agree with the idea that you can do consulting with perhaps even independent security researchers. You don't need to hire a full-blown, super reputable firm, top tier, whatever. Perhaps there might be security researchers out there in the ecosystem that might share their views on your protocol without running a full in-depth security review.
I think an important thing that was highlighted is doing a thread model. I think this is an interesting part because we do a lot of thread model for client in the kind of traditional space, for better lack of term, but we don't see a lot of demand for kind of those type of exercise in the blockchain space. I don't know exactly if it's kind of like a cultural shift or like people are less aware of this type of exercise, but they are definitely really, really useful to understand, more about like the different attack vector and thread. I've seen them in the blockchain space more for things like node or like, consensus, like off-chain component. I haven't seen a lot of people doing that for like, a pure Solidity smart contract type of things. However, what I've seen a lot, and we do a lot with our client also, is kind of more of a mid-cycle review where we will review the code, we will look at the code, but we will also focus on more like things like design recommendation, architectural risk, and stuff like that. And I think like this is really, really useful if you are building something which is a bit longer, something that is going to take 6 months, a year to be designed. Because if you have someone giving you recommendation half cycle or like at this kind of type of timeline, it will allow you to build like a code base that is going to be just robust overall. And like if you can prevent the bug from being there in the first place just by having like a better design or like a better kind of composability of your code base, it's a huge win. So definitely, if you can have this type of review mid-cycle or depending on how long is your project, it's a plus. However, if your project, again, if you are building something which is going to be developed in 2 or 3 months, you probably don't have the time for this. Like you probably don't have the time and the resource to have someone, mid-cycle helping you. So for those, either you can have some kind of quick consultation, but what I've seen the most happening is really like a security review at the end because of the timeline. So it depends, like the type of solution you're going to use for security depends on the complexity and depend on what you are building.
So you're almost saying, at this step, you reach out for a security review or, one of these threat models. If you're longer, I feel like the difficult thing here is for projects building for these different clients. They're going to come. Obviously, they're going to ask for recommendations. We can give them recommendations, but unless they have some kind of mindset of like, hey, this is what I need, it's difficult for them to come in and be like, hey, I'm looking for threat modeling. Right, because they're going to have no idea. You said you made a great point. You said, hey, like we don't even see that much demand for threat modeling, but this would be a great exercise. I know there's tools like, what is it, Gauntlet, that do some pretty interesting like economic threat modeling. I know there are a lot of tools out there that do this, but yeah, like this isn't. I feel like this isn't something people think about. Is this? How do we in a more objective manner be like, hey, if this, then you need to think about threat modeling. Is that even something that we can say, or is it really, hey, once they reach out to a security researcher, it's kind of on them to suggest it? Are there any thoughts there?
Yeah, it's probably a two-way street, right? As security researcher, we should maybe highlight this type of exercise a bit more, but it's also like from the community perspective to understand what are the benefits and if like the different project need this type of exercise. So it probably like goes in the two directions.
Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet in there. I don't think that there is a if A, then go do threat modeling, otherwise don't do it. Coming back to the point that someone was mentioning earlier, it's like there's risks involved, and it will depend on the risks that the team is willing to take at some point. So perhaps you can even do like risk analysis and try to understand where doing some threat modeling might be beneficial for your team, understand how much that would lower the probability of getting a hack. And I'm not saying that's an easy exercise. At the end of the day, you are trying to reduce risks. You're not trying to prevent every single hack because it's probably impossible.
So then it almost sounds like, because this is kind of subjective, and the reason why I'm focusing on the like what is the black and white? And the reason I'm focusing on that is, I want basically, the end of this to be like, hey, here is kind of the more black and white. Maybe it's not perfectly black and white, but like if you follow these steps, you can have a high degree of confidence. So it almost feels like for this step, it's really just reach out to security professional and have them be the ones to decide, do you need threat modeling? Do you need to, what kind of audits do you need? Do you need audits, et cetera? It sounds like that's kind of where we've landed here. It's really on the security professional to make that decision.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the project to be aware of the fact that they're not confident enough or don't have enough experience doing this sort of development, that they need that external expertise to tell them like what they should be doing. So we won't be able to help them if they don't come to us first. And it's sort of like probably the default would be, yeah, the amount of time and the money you will spend early on getting that consultation is going to be well worth it in the long run. For example, if there's some kind of consultation and they're completely unaware of like how wide of a surface they're exposing in a certain part, it might be my best advice to give up on some certain functionality, which is a lot of like dangerous lines of code, and do that in some alternative means. And this will cut down on the amount of code that they'll be sending to audit later on, and they'll also be safe from a bunch of different attacks. So usually, more often than not, early on, just get some kind of dialogue going on with security expert, and it's almost always worth it.
Great points. So basically, step 3 is almost we have reach out to security professional, and this is where we basically get into kind of the meat of the space as it is right now, where it's like, all right, cool, smart contract audit, check or not check, right? So we reach out to a security professional. We've already talked about some interesting non-audit tools such as threat modeling. What should the product be looking for? So they should definitely reach out to security professional. Are they looking for one audit pre-deploy? Or should they get the audit post-deploy? Should they now we're talking about this audits, and I don't know if you've seen it, but Spearbet, I know they recently posted, hey, get rid of the word audit. We should all say security review. Curious on your thoughts now that we've reached this step. So project has done 3 things so far. Number 1, assigned ownership of security. Number 2, done their basics, fuzzing, test coverage, etc. Number 3, they've reached out to a security professional and they are expecting what?
So I think it depends on what you are going to. Okay, you should define your goals. What are you looking for? If you are looking for feedback on the code base, if you are looking for architectural recommendation, and in addition finding bugs, then there's only like security review that is going to provide like a full coverage over the security spectrum. If you are just looking for bugs themselves, and if you are looking for only a focus on some area or some component, then you can go maybe for a decentralized context or a security review, depending of your budget and depending of what you want. But it's kind of depend on what you are looking for and what type of things you want to do. There's also something to consider about what you are building, because, for example, if you are building a fork of Uniswap, chances are that anyone in the space can review it, right? Like the attack are known, the type of issue are known, like there's a lot of public information out there. But if you are pushing the state of the art and if you are developing something truly novel, maybe not everyone will be a good fit. Maybe you need someone with expertise to look at this type of component. Similarly, like we talk a lot about kind of like smart contract, I think, type of review. But nowadays, you might have to consider more things. Maybe you have a solidity component, maybe you have an off-chain component, maybe you have like some interaction. So it's also important to look at what you want there. Do you only want a solidity review? Do you want everything to be reviewed? And who can help you with that?
So for me, the hard part of this is, and I understand where what you're saying. You're saying, hey, understand your goals, right? But maybe I'm a project and I'm just like, hey, I just want to ship. I just want to know that like I'm good to ship, basically, because I feel like, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's a large mentality that I see. Products that they build some code and they go, I don't care what you need to do, just make it so that people aren't going to get hacked here. right? And that's, or at least to me, that usually feels like the goal. Should they understand more than that, right? Like, is there something that they should, when you say understand the goals, should there be another goal outside of like, hey, just make sure that when we deploy this, it doesn't fall apart?
I think to make this type of decision, you need to go through all the steps that we discussed before, because they will give you a bit more kind of insight and information about what is important in your project. Where are going to be the funds, what are like the different threads that you want to protect against. So kind of like, going through all the process and all the steps we discussed will help you to understand what type of goals you are going to look for moving forward, if that makes sense.
So going through the other steps is going to help you understand your goals. So would you say there's like, let's say, a protocol goes through these steps. I still feel like the main goal is going to be, hey, make sure I don't get wrecked. Maybe there will be a goal of, hey, we want, we're a little bit concerned about some economic threat, over here based off of, the conversation on threat modeling. But it still feels like to me, they might go through the other steps just to be like, all right, cool. Like, I just don't want to get hacked.
I can add something to that. I think there needs to be, it would be interesting to see a little shift in mentality, in that there's no one-off security. It's not that you are or you are not secure. There are probably degrees. There are probably ways of, again, assuming or not assuming risks and probabilities around the chances of a project getting hacked. So I'm not of the opinion that there's a moment that you will be 100% ready to launch or to do something, right? There's best practices that you should follow. There's advice that you should follow. There's professionals that should help you in the process. At the end of the day, the responsibility will be on the developers or on the side in the launch. But assuming there are risks involved, and assuming that, well, perhaps you did everything you could in the process to lower those risks, and even thinking that perhaps a healthy mindset is that you might be hacked. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? It's not that, hey, let me make sure that I'm not hacked. Perhaps it's best to think about, I might be hacked. What can I do about it? How do I lower the risk about it? How do I mitigate the threats? How do I have a recovery plan about it? Do I have insurance about it? Like, there are many things around deploying a project. And it's not that at some point in time you develop something, you cross the line of security, now you're secure and you can launch and everything is good, right? So it's an iterative process, it's a comprehensive process. And I think it's somewhat simplistic to look at just by did I get an audit or not?
Definitely. Yeah, go ahead, Alejandro.
Yeah, I was just going to say an idea that I think would really help shift this mentality is this Swiss cheese model of risk analysis, where you liken each of these layers to, a slice of Swiss cheese, and there's randomly placed in size holes in each one of these layers. But when you stack each of these layers together, you have less and less risk of a vulnerability going through the entire stack. So really, these become layers of defense. No single layer is going to protect you, but all of them stacked together will.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. And I wrote a blog recently about it around 2 weeks ago, like looking at it from a hacker perspective and thinking, what are all the things that have to go wrong in the lifetime of a project so that I'll be able to attack it and get away with the money? And there's like 10 different layers that you can do. And yeah, the final stages of auditing, that's just like when you cross the line towards deployment, and then a bunch of new things open up. You need to set up a bug bounty, insurance, like was mentioned here. Also, if you can think about limiting your TVL in a way that scales with your security. So don't allow your project to lock in like $10 million if you can't afford to pay like a significant bounty. And maybe you want to get like reassuring audits as your project grows and grows. You might want to set up circuit breakers that, like, on some conditions, just halt withdrawals or halt some kind of very dangerous mechanism that you have in your project once you detect something weird is happening. So even though you're not aware of what exactly the hack or the exploit looks like, you have these certain steps that you can take to stop things before they go really wrong. And like one of the big issues in smart contract security is that the actual the opcode or the instructions running, they don't actually care if you lose like a $1 or 10 million, right? It's just a number for them. So if you're able to add that logic of like having that there's some extra behavior analysis that you can do and stop before things go too late, then and you're able to add that logic to your project, and that really decreases the likelihood of things going like terribly wrong, and it can just go a little bit wrong. So I think there's some ways that different projects can think about that mentality as well.
So I feel like we're all probably just because we're all security professionals here, we're probably all a little bit biased towards security is a journey, right? It is a subjective journey. So then I would love to try to answer the question on the other side then. So as a random normie community member, I see, okay, this protocol, they did go to they did get a security review, they did go to a security professional. It seems like they've thought about all these threat models and stuff. How can I have confidence that this protocol is secure?
As a user or as a developer of the protocol?
So now, like from a user perspective. So if let's say a protocol goes, all right, cool, we're going to go reach out to a security professional, and maybe it's not even time to shift the conversation to this because there's like 100 other topics to go over there. But yeah, how does a community member go, okay, cool, I see that they took these steps, that checks out with my mental model, looks good, I'm going to dump $100 million in here now?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it's difficult for the community to kind of evaluate these type of things. You can look at security review, but you have to keep in mind that we work for our client, not for the community. So the reports are not meant for the end user; they are meant to help, like the developer and the people building the protocol. As a user, like if I'm a user, I'm like in the kind of different situation. I think I will look mostly for the security posture of the company. We recently released maturity guidelines that can be useful to evaluate this type of things. For example, like a simple step is, do they define invariant? Do they know about the invariant of the protocol? And we have seen, like among our customer, there is a huge difference in terms of security and in terms of maturity between the developer that have a list of invariants that understand like the assumption of their protocol versus the ones that don't. I would also look at who do they work with, what was the scope of the review, what was the coverage of the review, because maybe it's a time box exercise, so maybe not everything was covered, and I think it's important. I would also not just look at the findings themselves, but I would look at the kind of recommendation that might highlight any architectural issue, any architectural risk. No one will find all the bugs, but if you see kind of a code base with poor design, it's usually a red flag for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with most of that, and it's good points. But one thing I would like to add is like we can look at it in a way that as security professionals, our clients are the project, but from a user's perspective, they're always still going to refer to our audits, and I think that's why we still have some kind of responsibility to demonstrate and to be transparent to the user according to all the risks that we uncover. So, like personally, what we do is also dispatch like a systemic risks report as well as centralization risks, and that is meant to give some kind of like a bunch of knowledge to the user regarding what kind of issues the project may be facing, and that's important because we are trusted as sort of a third party here between projects and users, and the project might not be willing to disclose all the different centralization risks involved. And this is where we come in and we say, like, this is what they're actually able to do. And from the other side, like, projects will be able to highlight in our report how, like, and prove to their users how decentralized their architecture is and so on. So I think we also need to be aware of the fact that we're kind of in the middle of this balance, and think about that as well. And one more thing is that our audit report is there's a bunch of limitations, and as a user, you kind of need to understand all the limitations around the actual audit, and those are time boxed, like was said here, and they're also skill boxed. So perhaps like this particular auditor doesn't have the necessary experience or the demonstrated knowledge to be able to find all the issues in this kind of code base. So you might want to see like what their previous work is like. You think about how many eyes looked at the code. So does it have like 1,000 stars in GitHub and like an active community maintaining it, and then the gap, like the time gap between someone noticing something going wrong and it getting fixed, if that's reduced, then that could be a sense of confidence for the user as well. And also one more thing is just regarding the audit. The audit isn't actually just like sort of uncovering all the issues that were able to be found at a specific point in time, but projects very often continue to upgrade and evolve their code base. So I'll be looking at like comparing what the actual deployed code looks like. Hopefully it's verified on Etherscan and so on. And then realizing that the more it deviates, the more it kind of becomes unaudited again, and you kind of need that reassuring security step again. So those are a couple more points I think are important.
So you bring up something that I think is really interesting. You're saying, hey, it's still on us as the security researcher, as a security reviewer, to look for those centralization risks, those gotchas, and really disclose the systemic risks to them that maybe the protocol is disincentivized to talk about, right? Like a protocol isn't going to be like, oh, by the way, we can like steal all your money. But at the same time, we've seen plenty of examples where a protocol goes, oh, by the way, this is out of scope. And maybe that's where that centralization, that systemic risk is. But maybe, for example, this out of scope thing is, 20,000, SLOC, or 20,000 like source lines of code. And it's really difficult for you to spend a ton of time going through 20,000 lines of code, just be like, aha, I found the place where you're centralized. Is that something that auditors should be responsible for going out of their way and doing? Is that or does it make sense to just put like a footnote in saying, hey, by the way, this was out of scope for us? We've seen on Twitter where a protocol goes, hey, we've got hacked, grr auditor, and then the auditor responds, it was out of scope. And then it's kind of like this weird like how do we handle both the protocol and the auditors? How do we handle a situation like that?
I think it's important to have coverage information in the report, but in fairness, I'm not sure users are really going through the reports. And I don't remember who started like a discussion on this on Twitter. Might have been C. Mitchell, but it was basically saying that like some project was being hacked and people were like, oh, they were audited by some company and so on. But if you were looking at the report, they were like disclaimer, and they were like saying, okay, we haven't looked at this, or there is some centralization risk. I don't remember exactly like the detail of the incident, but I think like the point I'm trying to make is that we always say like, you have to look at the report as a user and think like that. I am not sure it's what's happening in practice. I think a couple of people are going to look at the report, and these people are usually, maybe security researcher themselves, maybe developer with like a security mindset. But I don't think like non-technical people are really going to go through our report and go, through all the detail, all the maturity evaluation, centralization risk, and the issue themselves. There is this kind of, a lot of people are saying that in the space, but I'm not sure it's actually happening.
I think that's a good point, and that could be a reason why you'd want to structure an audit report in a way that is actually facing and is friendly to be viewed by some non-technical users, but then also have the technical stuff that anyone can go and see the exact bug and exploit and whatever. So that's something that we can look at, for example, in the executive report, see if all the issues have been resolved, and maybe get some sort of metric on where the things are at in terms of centralization, and also keep the centralization risks fairly user friendly and not as technical as they could go into. Just as a kind of understanding that we are in this, like as I said, in the middle of this, and users can't directly trust the project, so they need some sort of third party to give them some sort of assurance. And like we kind of are stuck. We're being chosen. We didn't necessarily volunteer to do this, but the way that the incentives were aligned, now we are being looked at to seek this sort of assurance. So we kind of have to step up to it.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, I think there are two perspectives here, like one from the auditor standpoint, another one from the user, just to avoid mixing them up. I think from the auditor's perspective, you have a deal. I mean, you are providing a consulting service with a client, and you have a deal with them, and you have a scope and a set of activities and tasks that you will carry out in a given timeline. And I think that's what the auditor should be responsible for. Like their responsibility is first and foremost with their client on complying with the deal that they have and the service agreement that they signed. In terms of the users, I think that even if security firms and professionals put information out there in the audit reports, I would agree with this idea that probably most users won't read it at all. And even if it's out there, well, as it was mentioned, like protocols can be upgraded, the deployment settings can be changed. There's even front-running stuff. Even it's not easy to even know what's been deployed is what was audited in what corresponds to the version audited in the report, right? So even those kind of comparisons are very complicated for even security professionals. I wouldn't even imagine how difficult it is for a regular user. So my usual advice for them is, I don't think you fully come to trust a given protocol. I think that you build some set of confidence throughout time with the development team and the project that is deployed. There's many sources of increasing that confidence, and many have been already mentioned. Of course, public audit reports might be one of them, but I think there might be more at that. And even then, like you still assume risks, right? So if in the original question you mentioned, what should a user think about if they are about to put $1 million or whatever amount of money? Well, know that you are assuming risks, and perhaps you shouldn't put that much money in the beginning if you don't have certain assurances. Right?
So it's pretty interesting. It sounds like we're pretty much all on the same page. Maybe there's a little bit of a disagreement. So there's the thought, yeah, hey, this is what the client scope is. Do that. Yes, give all the systemic risks. There might be some ideas. Hey, maybe you should go a little bit above beyond so the community can be aware. But at the same time, we're at the agreement that reading these reports, understanding the risks, is a skill in itself, and nobody's doing it. Or at least the community. And I know we're derailing from the topic of the conversation a little bit here. But that's kind of tough right there, right? So we're literally saying, hey, you should get good at reading these reviews. You should really get good at understanding risks of these protocols. Yet, if you're not a security professional, that's probably not feasible. That's kind of is that a tough? I feel like that's a tough pill to swallow. Is there a way for us to mitigate that outside of like just leveling people up at understanding security of these protocols? Is there something we can do there? That seems very like, hey, you should get, it's kind of the classic Twitter, like, oh, do your own research. But it's like, well, nobody knows how to do their own research. So there's like, everyone's kind of bad at it. Is there something we can do there? Are there thoughts there?
I would say that the public security research, reports should still be encouraged, because it's one of the best training resources for upcoming security professionals. And you kind of hit that point where it may not necessarily be all the users of a protocol that are reading these things, but people who are interested in learning more about security, and it's helping onboard more people into the space. So it's not for the users per se, as much for the health of the entire ecosystem.
And I think that there's like scams everywhere and like hacks, even Web 2. And we can try to learn from things like you can't prevent 100% of users getting the sufficient protection if they're not going to be protecting themselves in a certain way. So we can do things from our side to make it like friendly enough for users to look at, but we can't force users to read them. So there is eventually the responsibility needs to be on whoever is actually going to put their money or interact with the protocol. And we're here to kind of lessen the risk and to try to be transparent about everything. So if you are involved and you want to do your own research mentality, you will be able to, but we won't be able to do that for them. And like we've seen things in Web2 and in traditional companies, people are putting their money in things that they shouldn't have just because like it looked good or they had some nice APY or so on. So this is not something like Web3 introduced like as a problem. And we can try to learn from how things are being solved in this way, and like how to reduce risks from like traditional companies, and mainly looking for some sort of like trust anchor, some serious partnership that they have with big firms, or they're taking everything seriously. They have a lot the best VCs in the world are backing these projects, or this can kind of give you assurance around like the ruggability of a protocol. And then from the other side, from the security perspective, like do they have all these correct partnerships and monitoring stages and everything set up to defend? So we can kind of try to break that down to what my threat is as a user and see how this is being addressed by the project.
Maybe that'll be another panel or it sounds like actually a long educational curriculum called like how to read security reviews, how to know if a project is going to rug you. But it sounds like we're all on the same page with bringing us back to the actual topic of this panel here. Security reviews are for the protocol. They're not for the users. So if that's in mind, a lot of these sites that go, hey, this was audited, yes or no, really should just remove that because it's not sentiment. Well, I guess it's a little bit of sentiment. It's a piece of that puzzle to, is a protocol secure? But as like a checkbox, like yes, no, that should basically be removed, right? We should no longer be like, hey, so-and-so was audited. Is that
I think it's a difference between kind of having a minimal requirement and having enough requirement type of things. Because having like the public report is still useful. Like I'm not saying like they are not useful and they are not informative for the user, but they are not all, and they should not be, as a user, they should not be like your only solution and the only things you look for. I think we have to be upfront with like the user of like blockchain project. If you are like investing in any blockchain application or anything like that, you are taking a risk, and that's a reality. Like we are in a novel industry, we are in a new space. There is still a lot of things that we are trying to figure out, like in terms of a lot of the different risk and best practices. This is not an industry with like decade of experience that has matured. We do have, however, and might be something that might not be always clear from like the outside, but we do have in the industry some of the most, like security forward mindset that from the entire software industry. We have some of the teams that are really pushing forward security and are really pushing forward state of the art. But at the same time, we have a lot of people that don't do that and don't do like the baseline and like the basic requirement. So you have to be aware that they are kind of like we have some of the best, in my opinion, like some of the best security mindset in the industry, but at the same time we have some people that just YOLO deployment and do things without following any best practices. So you are taking a risk and you should be aware of that.
All right, great. So to switch it back to what does a project need to do to stay safe? That was I think that's a really interesting piece of this puzzle, because like the community at the same time is like, all right, well, what do I need to know that the project has done in order for them to stay safe? And as we're saying, hey, it's more of there's no binary, cool, they're good, they're not. It's definitely, it's the same answer we've been giving. It's this security journey. So right now we have 3 more or less more concrete steps. We have assign ownership of security, get your basics, and then basically reach out to a security professional / understand your assumptions and your goals, right? So we're on this, we're speaking to a security professional. How many, and this is where getting to this is we might have some differentiating opinions here. Should we reach out to multiple security professionals? Are there different types of security professionals that we reach out to, such as a private security audit, a public security audit, a competitive security audit? How to tell which ones are good? How do we know what to do? How do we know how many? Let's start with one at a time. Should we reach out to multiple security professionals? How many types of these pre-deploy reviews or audits should we do?
In my view, I mean, there might be different opinions probably. Probably it's from my experience, my journey within security. I think that I want to say like get everything, get as much as possible. But I know that's not feasible, right? So I'm of the idea that at the beginning, you don't only want like individual bugs. I think Josselin at some point was mentioning it, but I think that you want a more comprehensive look at the system for the first, to learn the most about the system that you're building. So probably if you can get a consulting firm that helps you not only find like actual vulnerabilities and gives you like a list of individual vulnerabilities, and that's perfectly fine, but also that can give you feedback around architecture, design patterns, the libraries that you're using, the integration risks that you have, where there are, overpowered roles that you might not be aware of given a certain attack vector that you didn't think about. Feels like a consulting firm that you can partner with at the beginning seems more appropriate to me. And ideally one that you can work over time, that you can like re-engage multiple times, so that they are already familiar with the system and can actually help you understand the impact of certain updates or certain changes in the protocol. So if you can do that at the beginning, in my opinion, I think that's a good step, but I know that some others might have a different view. And only afterwards I will go to the broader community with these competitive contests and crowdsourced security stuff. But happy to hear our thoughts. I think it might be interesting.
Yeah, I think if you look for like more long-term security, working with the same kind of company, auditor, or whatever you go for, might be a bit more beneficial. Typically, like our clients that I think benefit the most from us are our recurring client, because we have helped them, along the way. We have like a recurring work with them. We can help them and have like a more deeper understanding of what they are building. You can go through multiple, vendor and multiple firms, but I think this makes sense only if you are looking either for like individual components that you want, to do review, and if you have the budget for that, because security is also like a budget consideration. You might not have enough funds to go through to have the same component review by multiple people. If you have the funds, sure, do it, right? But if you are more kind of a realistic setup where you have like limited funds, you might not have this type of ability.
So both of you kind of said, well, Tincho said, hey, the more the better. Josselin, you kind of said the same thing, but Josselin, you were more like, hey, maybe just go with one, stay recurring with them and build that relationship. Although you both said, hey, re-engaging with the same auditor is really good. Tincho mentioned that, hey, maybe after you do this private audit, this one-on-one with them, maybe you can go to a competitive audit, maybe you can do a crowdsourced audit. Do you think that that's something that a protocol should want to do as well? Go to a competitive audit after a private audit?
By competitive
I
audit,
think
I'm
it's a really
assuming
good
you mean...
idea. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's I go. By competitive audit, I'm assuming you mean like things like Code for Arena and so on.
Yeah, Code for Arena or Sherlock or Codehawks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they provide good value. Like kind of if you don't have like budget constraints, like if you have enough money, I think starting with a mid-cycle review with a security company to get everything we just discussed is a good first step. Then probably going through like this competitive audit through the end to kind of catch all the surface level bugs and some of the more in-depth bugs is useful. And then, going again through a security review to go over like a more deeper review and, focus on some specific component based on what was found with the contest. And having some kind of evaluation if you properly follow the mid-cycle recommendation is probably also really useful. So kind of an ideal timeline, if you don't have budget limitation, a security review mid-cycle, a contest, and then as a last step, a security review is probably like a good, it's probably a good trade-off as of today.
So you think like kind of in an ideal world, security review, competitive audit, security review.
Yeah, I think so. If you have the budget, again.
Right.
Yeah, I think that there's just a very different kind of advantage involved in both the long-term private engagement and the advantage of like so many different eyes of code. These guys have different experience levels, and you can have like a Uniswap expert and a completely different like math whiz, and they're all looking at your code. So that gives you like something that you'll never be able to get from like a private auditor or a private firm. So I think both really have their advantages. And you can argue that the Sherlock model is just like the best of both worlds. You can have arguments and counter arguments around that. But the point is, I really think that if you can manage it, it's best to have both of them. And then if you have like these budget constraints, you can start thinking about how do I go around them in terms of like maybe I go with a bit of a lower end firm, so I can also squeeze in the community audit, or try to package the community audit differently, maybe reduce the scope just for the competitive audits, so the most dangerous parts are going to be covered in there. But I really think that you should, as a project, you really don't want to miss out on either of these paths. So yeah, I think so. And in terms of like you were mentioning like how many audits is just like 1, 2, like I think there's just no really one size fits all, and like you shouldn't come up with like a number before you even start the audit. It's like I don't think you need to be like thinking, okay, I'm going to have 5 audits and then I'm going to deploy. It's something that you need to keep on like reevaluating based on what's the feedback from your auditors. Is it more complex than was expected? Is your first audit kind of low quality and you're feeling like they're not really uncovering anything serious? Then you might want to get a replacement audit again. You need to be constantly be thinking and re-updating your data, and eventually you reach like some kind of a maturity level where like your audit doesn't it's really deep and great, but it still didn't find anything good, and that gives you the kind of confidence that you really have kind of tightened down all the potential issues. So, and yeah, if you still get like a ton of bug reports, like maybe 10 or 15 legit findings, then that could be a good metric to tell you if there were like 15 legit findings, there's a good chance that there's like more serious stuff that hasn't been found. So you might want to get a re-audit. And that number should continuously go down.
So if you get 2 audits, one gets 10, the next gets 15, that might be indicative that there's an issue and you should probably get another one.
Yeah, you always have to consider like what's the reputation of the audit firm and how good are they actually, like how much effort are they actually putting into it and so on. But you kind of want to always be thinking about like how mature is the code base at this point in time, rather than like 1 month ago and 2 months ago.
Great. Yeah. Love the feedback on this. So the sentiment here is basically, yes, a private security review with a firm or even an independent auditor are really kind of this great starting point, right? Because they can give you more personalized feedback. Hey, here's the architecture, here's different considerations. They can like talk to you. Then it might make sense to go ahead and do a competitive audit because they have these different attributes. And then still, maybe after that, you go do another security review, but it all depends, right? I feel like the answer to all this kind of goes back to, well, it depends, which for a project feels like a tough answer, but I feel like it comes down to, us doing a better job of like educating, hey, here are the things to think about so you can answer the question of it depends, right? Great, makes a lot of sense. So then how does and I've got this question before too, how can a project know if an audit was done well? How does a project assess the auditor? Because at the end of the day, hey, they're looking for to make sure their project is secure. Let's say they know their assumptions, they know what they're looking for, they know they're hoping to get a really good review. They go to an auditor, the auditor goes, hey, looks great, we found these little bugs, fix them and you'll be good to go. How can a project have assurance in their security professional so that they can have assurance in their protocol?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question. Like how to know which auditing or like security vendor to go through. I personally believe there is a lot of noise on Twitter, and you have to kind of make this distinction between people that are good at marketing versus people that are good at on the technical side. They might be the same people, but you might also have like a disconnection between that. What I usually kind of look for to evaluate technical expertise, definitely looking at previous reports, what type of project they work on to understand kind of like their level of expertise. It's not the same reviewing like an NFT project and reviewing like a complex lending protocol. It doesn't require the same type of expertise. Don't just look for the number of vulnerability, because if you look at like really bad code base, sure, you're going to report 20 vulnerabilities and that's okay. But if you look at something really more mature, it's going to be different, and maybe you're not going to have like any high severity. It doesn't mean that the report was not good. It might mean that the code base was just more mature. So don't focus on the number of vulnerability, but focus more on the type of project that was done, and look at like the recommendation, look at what was done. I usually also look at who create new content versus who is going to consume content. It's usually a good indicator of technical expertise. And it's not just about publishing content, because a lot of people can copy existing knowledge and rebrand it for marketing purpose. But I'm talking about like who are going to push the state of the art, who are the people that are can create novel content, find new type of attack, find new type of vulnerability. Because usually like this type of people are the one at the frontier and are the one that have like a good technical expertise. Obviously there is also again a budget consideration. You pay what you get for, right? So.
I think I agree with all of that. I would also add that there's a partnership during the auditing process, during the review of a code base, right, by a security firm. So in this partnership or service that you're providing and you're being provided, I think there are some ways of telling how professional these people working at the other end are, right? So how are the communications during the whole process, whether they are responsive or not, what kind of questions they ask, the insights that you as a developer gain from those questions, from those recommendations, from those discussions that happen between auditors and developers. Even in the reports, like the way they are written, the description they have, how detailed they are, the accuracy of their recommendations. There are lots of rather, I wouldn't say unprofessional reports that you read the recommendations and you soon realize that they might not know what they are talking about. So there are many points, I think, that during the whole process in which you can subjectively evaluate how you are interacting and how you're feeling towards these auditors. I don't think there is a checklist to say these are the right things and that every auditor should be following and everything. But I think, again, throughout the process, there is a way of realizing how confident you are feeling with the professional work that these people are doing. That on top of everything that Josselin said.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And obviously, one of the most important things you want to be thinking about is like, what is the reputation of the auditor or the audit firm that you are working with? And it doesn't really necessarily mean anything that they only had 5 findings and some other auditor from Twitter has 20, right? So this is your code base, it's your level of development and so on. So don't necessarily try to look at signal when it's just noise. And you can also ask them a lot of questions like, what have you been considering when looking at the code base? Did you look at what kind of Oracle attacks did you think about? What kind of MEV considerations did you have in mind when looking at the code base? And you can start listing out and looking at it. And many times you'll see the answer is like the auditor, you'll start seeing like, where is the depth of knowledge that the auditor has, and where it's just like a very surface level, like going line by line and not really considering more sophisticated stuff. So I would say try to get that sort of feeling from the communication, the dialogue, like Tincho said. And that usually gives you a pretty nice overview of the level of audit you received. So yeah, those are my points.
Great points. Great points. So this is kind of all pre-deployment, and I know we only have 20 minutes left. It feels crazy. We've been talking for 70 minutes already. So this is all pre-deployment. Is there anything else pre-deployment a protocol should think about?
I would plan the post-deployment before deploying.
All right, perfect. So let's talk about post-deployment then. So we'll talk about post-deployment in the context that Tincho just put it in, us thinking about it during the pre-deployment. So I'm a protocol. I'm going to deploy. What do I need to think about for post-deployment? And yeah, we only have 20 minutes to talk about this here, but yeah, good luck, us.
I think one of the biggest things that they should think about for post deployment is setting up a bug bounty program. So with a lot of these pre-deployment things, there's a limited period of time for a lot of professionals to look over your code, but they are constrained by that resource of time. With bug bounties, you run them over an infinite period of time, and you're incentivizing eyes to pull from a wide range of experts who may have certain niches to look into your code and tell you if there's a vulnerability. So I assume we're going to talk about monitoring automated security responses here as well. But the downside to monitoring and automated responses is that the vulnerability has to have occurred or exist in the mempool and about to happen. The really, really great thing with bug bounties is you get that information advantage of you get disclosed this bug or vulnerability in your code base that hasn't entered the general consciousness yet. So you have a major advantage to go and patch your code or save user funds. And the other great thing about them is you're not spending any money until a vulnerability is found. So you can set up a bug bounty program completely for free and not pay until you've received value. Yeah.
I think bug bounty should definitely be in your strategy. It's definitely something you should set up. We're getting like post deployment. I think if you think about post deployment right before your deployment and you're like, okay, I'm going to deploy next week, how to do the post deployment, you are doing it wrong. In my opinion, like you should define your monitoring strategy alongside your development. Where to put the events, what type of information you want to be easy to monitor. Because if you do that at the end, you might miss some other things. It's really important to have an incident response plan. I don't think most of the team have that, but they should. If an incident happens, at 2 a.m. on a Sunday and you don't have a plan, it's going to be really stressful for you. It's going to be like this type of situation where you are going to make mistakes just because of the stress and you're like the last minute. You also need to test your incident response plan. So it's nice to have a plan, but you need to test it because that's the only way you are going to ensure that you have the proper information. Like if you have multiple wallets, who are going to be the person who has like the type of wallet? If you have like, an upgradability scheme, how do you test your upgradability before doing actually like the upgradability? So all the things should be defined and tested, on a continuous basis. If that does help, we have some guideline in securecontract.com about incident response. I think like a lot of people are kind of trying to push different guidelines in the community, and I think it's definitely something where we need more information and we need more visibility because I haven't seen so many companies having like a good process there.
Yeah, and there's one thing I wanted to point out is even though bug bounties are a post-deployment security measure, you definitely want to be thinking about this pre-deployment, setting up your bug bounty, what impacts you're most interested, setting up your engineers who will be on call to respond to bug bounty submissions. All of that is very important to think about before you launch your contracts.
So here's a little bit of a derail question. So for a lot of these protocols, they're decentralized, right? So, maybe I launch some tool and I go, hey, there's nothing I can do. It's out there. I don't need to think about monitoring or incident response because it's not mine. It's the world's code now. Is there somebody that should still be responsible? Are there thoughts around a post-deployment process when you're planning on not having it be your responsibility anymore?
I think there's still part of responsibility, and you have to account for the fact that your contract might be used by other contract. So, like if you deploy, even if you deploy something which is permissionless and you cannot act on it, there is a risk that, or not a risk, a chance that other protocol will rely on it. So I would say it's part of your responsibility to make sure at least other might be able to monitor easily your protocol, might be able to find this information, and this goes through having like proper information, proper documentation, proper event, not just for you but also like for the whole ecosystem.
Okay, I'll just say later Tincho can say stuff. But I was just saying that I think that like even if it's the permissionless protocol, there's still a bunch of things that you can be responsible for and still help out on. First of all, you can if there's still like a really serious vulnerability around, that you can try to notify the large stakeholders in the privately and try to get them to get their funds out and try to do that in a responsible way. That's really important. Also, you may be able to perform a white hack and save the funds at a certain point in time before others have access to it. So that's also why you might want to have a bug bounty, even though everything is completely decentralized and you don't have the owner key. That's all.
Yeah, the vast majority are not fully decentralized, and there's often a team that can do something. So setting up a bug bounty for that and having some stakeholders which will respond to these security incidences or disclosures, you're still going to usually have someone to communicate the issue to. Some other things also is you can just, let people know to stop depositing. You don't necessarily need to disclose the vulnerability itself publicly.
Yeah, I was just about to say similar to that, right? So you can get in touch with the community if anything happens, notify about what's going on responsibly, and even I was like notify even forks. Some people might take the time to do that. If you have people that have forked your project, even if it's permissionless, but somebody forked it, perhaps you can get in touch with them and notify them that might be a vulnerability that the fork should also patch. And do it responsibly, not publicly. I think that's also a nice thing to do.
I feel like the monitoring strategy and incident response plan steps in this process are criminally underused. Is that a sentiment that you all see as well?
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm getting. Is there? Do we know of kind of like an easy solution for, hey, like at least do this? So recently I spoke to some of the team at Forta. I know the BlockSec, for example, they built some monitoring bots. You might have seen on Twitter, hey, we blocked this random transaction. Is there like, hey, at least set up a Forta bot, or at least practice getting in a war room? Is there like an easy at least? Where can people go to kind of start learning about that stuff?
I think at least practices being in a war room should be like the minimal. because this is going to help you to identify what you need if you're in a situation where you have no clue about what you need.
Yeah, at least set up some monitoring on drastic changes to your TVL. Definitely have a bug bounty program. I'm going to keep shilling that just because of the value add that you get. And I would really like to see teams to start building out bug bounty response teams, just so they have some people who are practiced in what to do when you get a private disclosure of a critical vulnerability.
I would say also add, like, as a minimum, have a plan of what to do in the moment of like a hack taking place or a bug bounty submission, like a critical severity being sent. So you need to know who the person in charge is going to be ahead of time, who is the first line of defense, like who's the guy who actually gets notified from an Immunefi or some other bounty, and have these coordinations take place ahead of time. All the communication channels need to be set up. Maybe you would want to have your a trusted audit firm or a white hat hacker be notified and also take part in these processes. So try to take, like, the more you prepare for that, it becomes much more planned out, and you can make the decisions in a way that is not less chance to make mistakes due to all these time pressure scenarios that you come up with. So just try to delegate everything early on, and then the plan becomes much more of like an autopilot, and you can have a cool head and do everything correctly.
This almost sounds like feedback for all the educators out there, myself included, almost like hey, your project isn't done unless you have a monitoring strategy and incident response plan set up. I feel like that's something that's criminally undertaught. All these developers, they know how to do Solidity. Maybe they know how to do fuzz testing. Maybe they know, they're wizards at Foundry, but they ship it, and then they're like, oh, okay, what do I do now? So this is something that. Sorry, go ahead.
If I can adjust to that,
Yes.
I agree with many of those points. I think with all of those points, at least also have a lawyer before you do anything. I think that's important.
Interesting way. Curious to hear more. Like why at least also have a lawyer? What do you mean before do anything? So like you shouldn't even deploy before you have a lawyer.
Probably, but if an incident happens, you should get in touch with a lawyer probably, because money might be lost and there might be like different responsibilities. So you should be careful with every single thing that you do. I think that getting advice from somebody that is more experienced than developers in terms of legal responsibilities, I think that's a good advice.
So the question here is, what does a product need to do to stay secure? And one piece of advice here is get a lawyer. Fair enough. Love it. Excellent. Okay, cool. So we've got like 5 minutes left here. I feel like there's a ton of stuff we still haven't touched on. There's a ton of different places that we can go to. I would love to touch really briefly on either responsible disclosure policies or white hat policies, because so we've been talking about bug bounty programs, which are phenomenal, but if you're sitting there and you see, oh my god, there's $500 million ripe for anyone to take, it's very scary to say, okay, I'm going to go and delay me calling this function because I know that the clock is ticking. Is there some type of white hat policy that protocol should have? Responsible disclosure is something that I've talked many times about, that we kind of as a community don't have like a black and white solution. I know we've seen a couple different solutions. I know Jump Trading had these safe contracts. I'm curious what the thoughts are on white hat policies or responsible disclosure policies with these protocols.
Yeah. So if you're a researcher and you do come across a $5 million bug or $100 million bug, the first thing you should do is check if they have a bug bounty program. That is the easiest way to get in contact and get the information to the project, to the right people, to mitigate the vulnerability. As far as policies around those disclosures, we do have a list of, for Immunefi, we do have a list of rules and guidelines for disclosing vulnerabilities. Obviously, the biggest thing is don't publicly disclose it anywhere else. Either in your testing, don't do any testing on mainnet or public RPCs. And you can check out all the rules. And the biggest thing here is really, for both parties to have respect. So, white hats should have some grace with their reports when they're submitting. These projects aren't dumb. And if you're assuming the people who wrote the code are dumb, you'll miss a lot of the more nuanced and rewarding vulnerabilities. So the white hats shouldn't make any assumptions in the project's abilities and come forward with these vulnerabilities in a place from respect, because our goal here is to connect these security experts in the space with projects and facilitate a conversation that helps save user funds. We take any kind of threats or any kind of bad actions seriously, because we're trying to facilitate a safe space for these disclosures, for these projects to save hundreds of millions of dollars, and for the researchers to get rewarded for that fairly. So definitely both parties should have respect. And if there are issues when you're submitting through Immunefi, you are able to ask for help as well, because we want to be the mediators in taking the facts and showing exactly what value is provided here, if there's value being provided. Yeah.
I think this touched on an interesting point. Like if you find, let's say you find a bug in a contract, you can steal the funds. There is no security contact. There is no, no bug bounty, no point of contact. You have no one you can discuss with. It puts you in a dangerous situation. And it's kind of funny if you come from like the traditional InfoSec space, because some years ago you could be in a position where you will go to jail just because you were reporting a bug to a company. There were no white hat people that were reporting vulnerabilities just for like the benefit of the ecosystem, and they would have legal issue for that. So when I see like some people doing white hat hacking, for better terminology, you have to be careful, because things can go things can go bad really quickly. And I go back to what Tincho was saying about having a lawyer, because these type of things are tricky. If there is no white hat policy, if there is no point of contact, you might put you at risk by just taking an action. There is a line between ethics and the law, and you have to be really careful if you are in this position.
If anyone listening has listened to Darknet Diaries, big fan of this podcast, Darknet Diaries, he talks about a lot of Web 2 white hat hacks, where the white hat was like, hey, I found this vulnerability. They disclosed it, and like cops showed up to their house and arrested them, which is like insane to think about, because they're doing kind of this public good. And law enforcement might freak out, like, oh, how did you have access to this? How could you have possibly done this? And yeah, it definitely can be very tricky. So I guess the tough thing is when you're sitting there, in practice, it feels like it makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool, do the right thing, go reach out. But there's a number of things that can happen, and we have literally 60 seconds left. Maybe we'll have to save this for another call. I do want to ask just one more really interesting question, and we're kind of getting away from what a product needs to do to stay safe. But let's say a great question from John in the chat here. What happens when a white hat points out a bug, a protocol acknowledges it but refuses to fix it? Now you're kind of in this even weirder seat where you're like, oh my God, I'm looking at a $50 million bug. Protocol says, yep, like screw off. What do I do? Like, all these people are going to lose their money.
Talk to a lawyer.
Yes.
If that happens on Immunefi, definitely ask for help. We are the arbiter there of these reports. And if the bug is real and has real world impact, we're going to fight for you.
Cool. Well, with that, we are at time. This has been phenomenal. I know I've got a ton of value out of this. It sounds like the people who are watching have as well. We are going to turn this into a summary video too, which will be fun. But before we jump off here, are there any last thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, accolades, anything else anyone wants to say before we close up here? No? Okay, great.
No,
Well,
I will just thank
yes.
you for organizing this. I think it was a great talk, and I think hopefully the community has benefited from it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
I
it was great
want
to
to say
do.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think that the main priority here is to just get the knowledge out so projects will know like what steps to follow. And I think we've done a pretty good job to get them started at asking the right questions. And I mean, on top of that, they now have all the tools that they need to be able to know like what point we need to be reaching out and what to expect from all these engagements with security professionals. So I really appreciate you taking the time to organize this and equipping the projects with the right type of knowledge to do this part that we know very well, but we understand also that projects have a bunch of other things that they're in charge of. So this is our chance to show like what kind of value they can gain from being security aware and hopefully have their own great security stance.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming here. I know that this is going to be incredibly valuable for the community, especially when we splice this up and make even more content to say, hey, like this is something we need to think about. And even kind of towards the end here, it sounds like there are still some things that, we as a community need to do a better job really ironing out. So that's something for us as a Web3 group to do. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I know you'll have incredibly busy schedules, being some of the top minds in Web3 security. And thank you everyone who attended and watched. And be sure to look out for the summary video that'll come out on my YouTube channel as well. And we'll be making some educational content out of this too, teaching what you have just learned here. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.